Hey guys, Simon here, and thanks for stopping in and checking out my video. Today I am talking about Marvel's Spider-Man for PS4 and my first video in a series about the story concept for the game. What I will be talking about in this video is what I believe the story could end up being or look like based on my own opinions, things we have learned from Game Informer, some comic book lore, and recent news from E3. Feel free to take this information as a grain of salt or as gospel if you want. Either way, we won't find out until September. But if you guys enjoy what I have to say, do the button thing, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know how far off you think I am on some of my points or what you think could end up happening. Thanks again for watching, and here we go. Okay, before I jump into my ideas and explanation of things, I want to address something first, that being the whole comparing the Spider-Man game to the Arkham franchise. I myself am guilty of saying this and making this comparison, but I want to explain what I mean when I compare these two things. I am not saying that this game is going to be a carbon copy of Batman reskinned as a Spider-Man game. When I say that this Spider-Man game is going to be like the Arkham franchise, I mean Insomniac is going to put their stamp on Spider-Man the way Rocksteady did for Batman, making us feel as if we are the wall crawler, making us feel as if we are swinging through New York City, making us feel as if we are a real super-powered superhero like how we felt when we were first using the Dark Knight's detective vision. I am just looking at this game as the next step in the evolution of superhero video games, so that way when the next franchise comes around we will be saying, is it like Insomniac's Spider-Man franchise? Okay, so let's get into my ideas for the story. So, to start us off, I'm going to fully explain what I think is going on in the story and then give you the reasons why I believe these things could happen or are happening. I believe the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, is the mastermind behind everything in the game. He will be the one responsible for Kingpin getting arrested at the start of the game, which will begin the transition of power from Fisk to Osborn. Since we don't fully know everything about this world, we have no idea if Norman is the Green Goblin yet, or if he perhaps, via the comics, has amnesia and forgot he is the Green Goblin. We just don't know, and we have no way of knowing until the game comes out. I believe Spider-Man and the Goblin have yet to cross paths, so they won't know each other yet in the game, and we will watch as Peter discovers this new villain is his friend's father. Another reason I have this feeling is because the writers and developers have stated as much when saying the best Spider-Man stories are when Peter and Spider-Man's worlds collide. What we do know about the Goblin and Norman, though, we can take from the comics. Norman has always been power hungry and sought out success because of how much of a failure his father was, so he never wanted to be like him. On top of this, when he started Oscorp in the comics, he started it with his close friend and professor from college, Mendel Stromm, who he later accused of embezzlement so he could have him arrested, have his stock shares sold to Osborn, and then gain control over Oscorp. When he goes through Stromm's things, he discovers the Goblin formula, tries to make it, and it blows up in his face, and the Green Goblin is born. When this happens, Osborn decides to take over all organized crime in the city under his rule as the Green Goblin. He decides one of the best ways to do this is by defeating Spider-Man to make a name for himself. One of the ways he plans to accomplish this is by hiring people to attack Spider-Man, fighting him on his own, but he believed that teaming up with anyone would prove he couldn't handle the webhead alone, so he opted out of that as an aspect of it. Since Norman is running things as mayor and running for re-election, he knows he could control just about every single thing in the city if he could also take over the crime. Being in this position, he also knows just how powerful Wilson Fisk is as the Kingpin, which is why I believe he will be the one behind Fisk getting arrested and possibly even setting him up at the start of the game. We know Fisk likes to run things with an iron fist, and even when he is arrested, he tells reporters and Spider-Man he was holding back something worse, and that if you give the city a month, they will be begging to have him back in control. This is a very big statement coming from Fisk. He could be blowing smoke, but let's look at his track record for a minute. At the height of his power in the comics, he was more powerful than all of the Magi crime families combined. Those families being the ones run by mob bosses like Hammerhead, Silvermane, the Nefrai family, the Costa family, which is the one that's responsible for killing Frank Castle's family, and the Nobili family, and a bunch of random people who don't fall into a crime family but work for them or under them for whatever reasons but aren't truly affiliated. These families once combined efforts with Hydra just to take the Kingpin down because he was so powerful. They were successful and drove Fisk out of New York to Japan, but in Japan, Fisk was able to start a spice business, regain most of his wealth, and then he returned to New York, started a gang war which created a huge power vacuum in the city, allowing him to take back control. He would lose it later on to different people for different reasons, but he would always come back and regain control of the city. The Wilson Fisk-Norman Osborn dynamic is a bit odd. Fisk, like Osborn, uses his name and persona to appear as a legit businessman who is trying to make the city better and give back. Osborn is using his mayor platform as a way to better the city and its people. However, their alternate personas of the Kingpin and the Green Goblin don't care about the people, only their power over them and what it can bring them. So what I am trying to drive home here is that the Kingpin is not someone to take lightly, and not someone you want to be on the bad side of, because he will find a way to get back at you and regain all that he has lost. However, with him getting arrested early in the game trailers and knowing what we do from E3, it seems he will be out of the picture early, but does have some phone calls with Spider-Man where he informs the webhead that if he helps his men, Fisk may return the favor in some way with information. It's worth noting that Fisk's men in the game seem to be destroying paperwork that would undoubtedly lead to incriminating Fisk and sending him away for a long time. So other than the police, who stands to benefit from Wilson Fisk going to jail? This list could be very long, but again, using what we know from news and E3, let me see if I can narrow it down for you. First, Norman is the main man that benefits. Being a politician, I'm sure a lot of them were in Fisk's pocket, and Norman, being the master manipulator he is, would have no problem acting in fear of Fisk, if he knew he could just fly his glider into his penthouse and pumpkin bomb the shit out of it. Or perhaps he knows he can't do this, or that it would draw too much attention to himself, and decides to use Spider-Man to get rid of his #1 problem, so Fisk doesn't suspect the Green Goblin as Osborn. Second, the Magi crime families. These guys are all tired of Fisk and the table scraps he is leaving them, so no doubt they would love for Fisk to be gone. The only thing is, I don't see how they could manage or why they would want to get Fisk arrested instead of just killing him outright, because it would damage them just as much as if Fisk was arrested. Actually, knowing Fisk, this would work out in his benefit if he could cut a deal to give information on the other families to get a reduced sentence or get out entirely, which he has done in the comics. We don't know which of these families will be in the game, but chances are we will see Hammerhead and hopefully have some mention of people like Silvermane, the Owl, Tombstone, and some of the other crime families and their members. Which brings us to the third choice, Mr. Negative, Martin Lee, leader of the gang, the Inner Demons. His story in the game sounds similar to his comic book story. He leads this gang and, using a new drug called Devil's Breath, wants to take out all of the other crime families so he can take control of the criminal underworld. It's also worth noting that he was captured in the comics by the Magi family led by Don Silvermane and experimented on with a synthetic drug which gave him his powers, causing him to have two personalities that are not aware of each other and have separate goals. Lee runs Feast, which helps people, and Mr. Negative does his thing, as I said. What we do know from E3 now is that Mr. Negative is also working for someone and appears to be part of the Sinister Six in this game due to him saying, "Remember, he said not to kill him."
Remember! He said not to kill him.
From this, it leads us to someone showing up who is yet to be named but would undoubtedly be the leader of the Sinister Six, which I believe is Dr. Octopus. I believe he will show up here, and for a few reasons. First, he was the one who originally put together the Sinister Six and more often than not is usually their leader. Second, in the game footage we saw from E3, we can hear an odd sound when Spider-Man is looking up at this mystery person who shows up being very surprised to see them. To me, this sound sounds very similar to the noise of Doc Ock's tentacles when moving. To give you an idea of these sounds, check out these clips of Dr. Octopus moving around from films and cartoons.
Face to face.
Also, as Spider-Man is crawling away from the villains, it looks like the building shakes slightly, almost as if Doc Ock is using his tentacles to walk up the side of the building before showing up. You could say it is just the camera, but if so, why would it shake in the first place and then steady itself? Third, Dan Slott is one of the writers on this game who had an amazing run on Spider-Man during the Superior Spider-Man storyline that saw Otto Octavius take over Peter's body and become Spider-Man for a while until Pete got his body back. The storyline was awesome, and with Slott being a writer on the game, I have no doubt Octavius is going to show up running the Sinister Six and working with Osborn to try and take over New York, since Slott writes an amazing Octavius. 4. In the game footage from E3, we also know that whoever is behind the Sinister Six, whether it is Otto or Osborn, one of these two made new suits for Rhino, Scorpion, Electro, and possibly Vulture, which they have both also done in the comics for some of these guys. These new suits also look very advanced with tech, which would point easily to Oscorp, but we also know that Otto is a genius, so it's possible he did it too. My bet is that there will be some type of collaboration between them, possibly with each of them thinking they are using the other for their own ends. However, things will fall apart for the bad guys. At some point in the game, this alliance between the Sinister Six, Mr. Negative, and Osborn will fall apart. I am saying this because at some point, Osborn will lose his shit as the Green Goblin, thinking someone might be challenging his leadership, or just because he is a megalomaniac. This is normally what happens for Norman. It's one of his flaws. He did it before in the comics when he wanted to prove he didn't need anyone's help to defeat Spider-Man. Another time when he wanted Matt Gargan to use a new Scorpion suit he made for him, but Gargan wanted to keep using the Venom symbiote he had, which pissed off Norman even though the Venom suit made him more powerful than the Scorpion one would have. Also, we can see from this comic panel that Osborn, while he may respect Doc Ock, sees himself as a step above him in terms of a threat to Spider-Man. Basically saying, yeah, you are tough and important, but you are not on my level of importance. A few loose ends here for me to talk about, so you guys think on this stuff and let me know what you think. A good piece of information that I think really helps my theory is, if you go to the PlayStation website, you can do a search for the Spider-Man game, and on its main page there is an article for an issue of the Daily Bugle. If you click on it, you can read a few minor articles about stuff going on in the world of the game. One of these articles talks about Osborn's run for mayor. According to this article, Osborn announced his third run for mayor, which is made possible by a new bill that was passed by the city council, which Osborn himself put up, so he could continue to be mayor. This bill removed term limits on running for mayor, basically allowing Osborn to run for mayor as many times as he wants and he can keep winning. His third run sees him focusing on citywide security and eliminating the need for masked vigilantes like Spider-Man, and providing better support to the police force, among other initiatives, like maybe a Sinister Six initiative? We also know from the trailers that Mr. Negative seems to attack some kind of rally that is set up as support for Mayor Osborn, which would more than likely help gain support for Osborn in his third run as mayor. An attack on him after already being loved by the people would only strengthen his support and ensure his victory. Don't forget that Osborn is not above such things, once baiting Spider-Man to attack him on live TV to better out him when he framed him for murder during the whole Identity Crisis storyline. Another piece of info is from an E3 fake Daily Bugle newspaper. It would appear some kind of military-like force comes into the city and instills some kind of martial law, which is initiated by Osborn as mayor because after the raft breakout, Spider-Man has disappeared with the villains on the loose and Osborn needs to keep his promise of a safe New York. All over, this is a very crafty plot carried out by Norman Osborn as revenge against Spider-Man, or just outright defeat him and take over New York as the one and only boss. It is possible that Norman was the Green Goblin before and Spider-Man defeated him, causing him to have amnesia and maybe forgot that he was the Green Goblin. Spidey could have destroyed his Goblin suit like in the comics and never told anyone, hoping the Goblin persona wouldn't show up again, which could be one of the reasons he acts so surprised on top of the raft when this mystery figure appears. Norman's memory could be jogged by any number of things, but again, until we know more information or get our hands on the game, it's all speculation really. We know Harry Osborn will be a part of the game in the form of phone calls to Peter from overseas, and I wonder if this has some tie-in to Norman becoming the Green Goblin. In the comics, when Norman first found Strom's formula, it was Harry who altered it because he was mad at his father, and that was what caused the explosion that gave birth to the Green Goblin. We also know that this story is supposed to greatly affect Spider-Man by the end of it, with some people, myself included, thinking that this story could see a role reversal with MJ filling in for Gwen Stacy, and the end battle between Spider-Man and the Goblin taking place on the Brooklyn Bridge with MJ's death. This is without a doubt one of the most iconic moments, if not the most iconic moment of Spider-Man's career. Rewriting it for an ending like this could really leave a lasting impression on fans and really give a follow-up game a lot of new areas to explore down the road. This version of Spider-Man is supposed to show up in a crossover with the 616 Spidey, so for an ending like this and that crossover taking place, it could give Peter one hell of a shock to learn MJ died the same way Gwen did in another reality. Well guys, that is all I have for you on this one. I really tried to rack my head here and think of the possible ways this could play out, and for me, the Osborn auto theory feels like the best possible one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and got something out of it. If you did, stick around and I'll see you next time.